Hello everybody, and welcome back to From the Rafters of Rupp, the Kentucky Legends Edition. I'm Kyle Macy. This season, we continue to profile University of Kentucky basketball heroes of the past. In today's episode, we visit with a Lexington business leader whose distinguished radio voice covered the Kentucky program through 5 decades of Wildcat excellence. So sit back and enjoy this season's final chapter of From the Rafters of Rupp, the Kentucky Legends Edition. Ralph Hacker was a treasured member of the UK broadcast team from 1966 until his retirement from the booth in 2001. During that period, his ever-expanding role at WVLK grew from on-air announcing to management to ownership of the station. With the backing of VLK, Ralph helped build the UK network into one of the most successful collegiate franchises in the country. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Ralph, and we began our conversation talking about how he recalls getting his start in broadcasting.
I started doing high school ball games and even Little League baseball games when I was 15 years old. And they called me and said, "You've got to go to Murfreesboro, Tennessee and do a college football game." Well, I'd only done a couple of high school football games up to that particular point. So they took me down there, and I did my first football game in Murfreesboro, Tennessee at 15, 16 years old for Eastern, and then started doing them. I did them every year.
Ralph grew up during the 1950s in Madison County, drawn to the medium of radio. He shares how his interest in broadcasting developed while listening to iconic stations like WSM out of Nashville, WHAS from Louisville, and WCKY in Cincinnati.
I don't know, just I always wanted to work on the radio. Not so much television, but radio. I just thought it was an amazing accomplishment to be able to describe things to people. And my heroes were not the people on TV. My heroes were those people on radio, like Ralph Emery down in Nashville, Tennessee, or Dick Biondi up in Chicago, who was a disc jockey at that particular time. And then I'd listen to Wade Hoyt do the Cincinnati Reds baseball games. Or I'd listen to Harry Carey do the St. Louis Cardinals baseball games. And from that, I think I developed the idea that to be a storyteller rather than a play-by-play guy was the way I would like to go.
After Ralph graduated from Madison Central High School in 1962, he called Eastern Kentucky University football and basketball games for 4 seasons. He left Richmond in 1965 to enroll at the University of Kentucky. Ralph approached WVLK. He was looking for a job to help pay for school.
I didn't even go to VLK to be an announcer. I went over there to be a salesperson. And Claude Sullivan was working, took the Reds job. Jim Host was supposed to fill in for him. Well, Host went to work for Procter & Gamble. And they were looking for somebody to do the games. And Claude said to the general manager, he said, "Well, put Ralph on him." Said, I've been critiquing his tape since he was 15 years old.
Ralph began calling Kentucky games in 1966. He covered the UK freshman football and basketball games through the 1971 season. He remembers the feeling of being around the Kentucky program and interacting with Kentucky legendary coach Adolph Rupp.
I'd go to practice, 2 or 3 times a week. Kay Wood and I are one of the few people that could go to practice, and a couple of writers that we would go in there. And Coach Rupp would come over and many times he'd come over and sit down with me and explain things to me. I was 22 years old, and he would come and he would sit there and he would talk to me and explain what was going on and do all this stuff.
Building relationships proved to be one of Ralph's biggest assets throughout his career in radio. He talks about the special relationship he developed with Coach Adolph Rupp.
So I was the guy who 90% of the time drove Coach Rupp while we were on the road. In the last year that he was coaching, I think I drove him 100% of the time. In 1975, when he went to the NCAA tournament, when Kentucky went to the NCAA tournament, Coach Rupp went along, and he stayed across town in San Diego at the coach's hotel. I stayed with the team, and I probably would get 4 or 5 phone calls a day for me to come over and pick him up. He was ready to go someplace. So, I, up till the week he died, I probably had an average of lunch with him once a week. So I love Coach Rupp. He treated me in many ways like a member of the team.
We'll return with more of my conversation with Ralph Hacker after these words from our sponsors. Ralph Hacker spent 6 seasons announcing UK freshman football and basketball games. He then joined the voice of the Wildcats, Kaywood Ledford, as the color analyst for varsity football broadcasts in 1971.
And doing the freshman games and the high school games, John Ray was the head football coach at the University of Kentucky at that time. And John wanted to have somebody from Lexington on the broadcast. He wanted somebody who could come to practice, get to know the coaches, get to know the players, get to know the stories. And John liked the way that I did the ball games. So John contacted Harry Lancaster and told Harry Lancaster that he wanted me on the broadcast. And they contacted G.H. Johnson Company in New York. And they put me on in 1971.
Ralph proved to be a successful addition to the UK broadcast team. In 1974, he added the duties of hosting the popular Coaches Show to his agenda. WVLK recognized Ralph's unique marketing abilities and looked for ways to promote him within the company framework.
They wanted to move me to Orlando, Florida, the station that we had in Orlando, Florida. So I went down there, Maryland I did, and we picked out a house and we did all this and had everything ready to go. And we're prepared to go. And came back and my boss, who was Hart Hagen, says, we've been thinking about this and we don't want to send you to Florida. You don't have any experience, that's too far away, we'd like to keep you here and we'll send Bill Stakelin to Florida and you take over VLK. And put me in charge of VLK at 30 years old.
Being the manager of WVLK provided Ralph the opportunity to rub shoulders with other individuals at the top of the Kentucky sports market. One of those individuals was UK family media giant Jim Host.
It was probably that state tournament, is that Host was sitting next to me and Host was broadcasting the game for WVLK. And Host would talk real loud, he'd just scream and holler like that, he does still, and everything is excitable. And I'm doing like this, trying to, not let him get over my microphone, and he just keeps on. And finally I turn to him and says, sir, could you kind of keep it down a little bit? You're feeding over. And he said something to me like, well, talk louder. And that started a relationship with he and I. So I was 15 years old, say. And so from that particular point right up till today, we remained the best of friends. We're like brothers.
Until the year 1969, there were a number of outlets broadcasting University of Kentucky football and basketball games. WVLK had 2 broadcast channels. There was WLAP, and among others, Kentucky Central began a network specifically to broadcast UK games. Ralph discusses how the single origination broadcast feed developed for Kentucky football and basketball.
A company out of New York named G.H. Johnson Company bought the rights to that. Interesting there that G.H. Johnson Company also distributed the Metropolitan Opera every Saturday. A guy named Dick Frick, who came from a very wealthy family in New York City, was the head of that company. And so he was the producer of the Metropolitan Opera on radio on the NBC radio network. But they bought it and they hired Kaywood to do the broadcast.
In the mid-1970s, Ralph, along with partners Jim Host and Ralph Gabbard, negotiated the broadcast rights away from the New York-based group. Ralph recalls how the UK Sports Network became locally owned.
Jim had bid on the University of Kentucky broadcast and got them away from the G.H. Johnson Company. And in my position as running WVLK, I was in charge of the radio broadcast of the coaches shows. So I had the contract for the coaches shows. So at the time was Fran Kersey and Joe B. Hall. And then Channel 27 had the same contract with the coaches shows that just for TV. So we met in my office one day and Host starts saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I said, no, we're not. It's not going to happen that way. And so he looked at me and said, well, how's it going to happen? So Ralph and I spelled out how we wanted to see it. And Host said, well, then let's just form the partnership and we'll do it. So we formed a partnership with all 3 of them. We bring the coaches shows. Jim had the broadcast rights, but we mixed them together and came up with another company. And then we all owned equal thirds of it.
The University of Kentucky basketball brand continued to grow, and Ralph remained involved in many aspects of its expansion. Ralph shares his memories of Lexington's decision to construct what is now known to be iconic Rupp Arena.
It's an interesting story about how it got built, how the community came together, what their dream was, and how they stuck with it, and how 2 of the most powerful businessmen in town sat across the table from one another, being W.T. Young and Garvis Kincaid, and they sit there and they argued over every little point, and how Jake Graves, who was a banker and a farmer in town, his family goes back many generations in this community, he would sit there, and then when they would argue, he'd say, all right, boys, I've heard you. Now this is what we're going to do. And then they would vote, and that's what they would do. They would choose one of the sides or a mixture of the sides, and how things got built.
Ralph was fortunate to work with a number of talented, gifted hosts and co-hosts on UK radio. I was interested in knowing who he felt was the most influential in helping him shape his broadcasting delivery.
I would say of all of them, it may have been Claude Sullivan that I probably picked up more than anybody else. And then later in life, when I started working with Kay Wood, I picked up a lot of things that Kay Wood was doing. A lot of it had to do with preparation and working with him. And Claude, it had to do with description more than that. Claude was more descriptive and perhaps a better storyteller than Kay Wood. Kay Wood was a great play-by-play man to call the action as it was happening on the field.
Kay Wood Ledford retired following the 1992 basketball season. At that time, Ralph took over the play-by-play duties for both Kentucky football and basketball broadcast. I wondered if Ralph felt any additional pressure in taking over the job vacated by Kentucky's own beloved voice of the Wildcats.
Oh, a lot. I mean, a tremendous amount of pressure coming to there. You just, I knew I couldn't fill his shoes. There was no way anybody could fill his shoes, but he had quit. It was his idea. I begged him to stay. All of us tried to get him to stay. He said, no. He said, I've had enough. He said, Coach Rupp stayed for 40 years. Nobody should stay that long. He stayed 39, and he left. And it wasn't my idea that he leave. When the job came up, sure, I'd like to have had a shot at it. Had a shot at doing it, and that's what I got. Was a shot.
Kentucky experienced a number of coaching changes during the years Ralph covered the Cats. We talked about Ralph's relationship with Coach Rupp earlier. I also wanted to know what type of relationship he developed with Coach Joe B. Hall.
I used to go with Joe B. a lot recruiting. He'd say, you want to go see somebody play, or you want to do this, go to a high school game, and I would go with Joe B. To see those games. But yeah, I think that Joe and I have maintained over all these years, very close friendship.
Joe Hall retired and stepped down as head coach of the University of Kentucky after the 1985 season. The Cats targeted Arkansas coach Eddie Sutton and hired him away from the Razorbacks to lead the UK program in the fall of 1985.
I call a guy named Ted Snyder, who was out in Little Rock, Arkansas, who I served on the NAB board with. And I said, tell me about Eddie Sutton. And he told me I wouldn't like him, that he was hard to get along with, he wouldn't show up to do his radio shows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, if you don't mind, can you share with me in the area of what you were paying him? And he told me, and I said, well, no wonder he didn't show up, you didn't pay him. So we paid Eddie what we paid Joe B. So that thrilled Eddie to death to be making that much money. And they did the same for him with television. He was never late, never argued, and he did anything that was reasonable. But Eddie Sutton was and is a very special friend of mine, and I just loved both he and Miss Patsy to death.
In the spring of 1989, Eddie Sutton left the Kentucky program under a cloud of future NCAA probation. His replacement, a young, brash East Coast guy, straight from the NBA and full of personality, named Rick Pitino.
So we're sitting in Jim Host's office, Ralph Gabbard, Jim Host and I one morning. We had a regular monthly meeting, and we're sitting there, and in walks C.M. Newton, and with this young guy. And we all recognized who it was, and he comes over and he introduces him to each of us, and Pitino said to me, you're a lot younger than I thought you'd be. And I think, I've never met you before, to myself. And he said, I'd listen to you in Kay Wood as I was driving away from the Knicks games, or I was out recruiting, when I was up at UMass. He said, I'd listen to you guys. And he said, seemed like I've listened to you all my life. And that was the way we started out. I respected him. I think he respected me. He helped me. He allowed me things and taught me things that nobody else ever did.
Ralph called the Cats' 1996 National Championship game while Rick Pitino was still the head coach at UK. The 76-67 win over Syracuse in East Rutherford, New Jersey, marked Kentucky's 6th NCAA title. Next, it was Tubby Smith who replaced Pitino after UK's 1997 national runner-up campaign.
And so when they flew Tubby up here to get the job, I actually flew back to Atlanta with Tubby and Donna. I flew him up on a friend of mine's plane. So we flew back together and talked for a long time. And when he came here, Lord, we spent so many hours together, it's not even funny. You know, his wife, my wife, Marilyn, and he and I. And we did it both at home, on the road, and in the season, out of season.
We'll be back with more of my conversation with Ralph Hacker after these words from our sponsors. Ralph's coverage of Kentucky sports spanned almost 30 years. Of course, it was difficult for him to pinpoint his single most memorable moment with the Cats, and yet he did recall many of the unforgettable games that do still stand out in his mind, including the stunning come-from-behind win at LSU in 1994.
That was a great comeback, and I remember sitting there thinking, you know, there's no way it's going to happen, and all of a sudden people you never thought of getting hot got hot. And we started knocking them down. Jeff Grasso being right at the top of the list, you're knocking them down from all over the place. And it was a great comeback, which Kentucky beat LSU down there. They called it the Mardi Gras Miracle, is that what they end up calling the thing in the end? Yeah. That was a great one. I always thought a couple of the others was, I think it was you who beat Auburn twice in 1 year, didn't you, with a shot at the horn that beat them. And then the time that Darnell Valentine made it's actually a flopping call on Dwight Anderson, that he fell right in front of me. And after the game, he admitted it. But you took the free throws for some reason, and you made them. You know, you had a great last 11 seconds of the game. That's what happened, and you end up winning the game there. The North Carolina game, I think it's probably my first year. We're playing North Carolina down in Louisville, and we were down. And Jimmy Dan Connor just really pushed the coaches out of the way, and he says, if y'all will leave me alone, I'll win the damn thing. And they ended up winning, beating North Carolina at that particular time.
Ralph made the decision to retire from the UK broadcast booth in 2001. He discusses the reasons why he felt it was the right time for him to put away his microphone.
During the course of my life, I got very lucky and was able to buy some radio stations. And somebody came along and thought they were worth a lot more than I did, so I sold them to them. And that allowed me to live a life that I never thought that I would be able to live. And Marilyn and I had bought a house in Florida, and she wanted to go down there. And so we went there, and I was trying to do the last 2 years, I was trying to come back, do the ball games, spend a day before the ball game, go back immediately after the ball game. And I was on the plane all the time, going back and forth between here and Vero Beach, Florida. And after 2 years, I just was tired. And I just felt like it was time to get out. I'd done it long enough.
Ralph had a plan in place for his replacement. He shares who he recommended to take over the UK broadcasts and become the new voice of the Kentucky Wildcats.
10 years earlier, I'd hired Tom Leach. Jim LeMaster, a former player at the University of Kentucky, called me one day and said, do you need anybody? I've got this really good boy over here in Paris who needs a break. So I hired Tom, and he did news for us for a long time. And I told him, after a while, he started doing some ball games. I said, Tom, if I have anything to do with it when it's all over with, I want you to take my place, whenever that happens to be. Fortunately, I had the backing of C.M. Newton. And CM saw it my way, and in the end, Tom got the broadcast.
There have been so many individuals who have benefited from on-air opportunities provided by Ralph Hacker. On behalf of all those who received their start in radio from Ralph, we say thank you to Ralph Hacker.
Fortunately, I've always felt better in the role of being a kingmaker than a king. And there are a number of people who've done well. Dick Gabriel, has done well. Dave Baker has done well. A guy who just left as president of CBS Radio, Dan Mason, worked for us, and he's done well. I started mentioning names, and I probably shouldn't, but I could just go on and on and on. But people with whom I have worked over the years or given an opportunity to work, who've gone on and succeeded. And if I ever had a legacy, I'd want that really to be that, is that he helped some other people along the way.
Ralph Hacker spent 29 years announcing and analyzing Kentucky football and basketball games for the Big Blue Nation. He began his career with the Rupp's Runt squad, which finished as the NCAA runner-up in 1966. He called 3 national championship seasons for Kentucky in 1978, 1996, and 1998. As manager and owner of WVLK, Ralph established himself as one of the most successful collegiate sports broadcasting managers in the country. Ralph Hacker's legacy lives on in the voices he groomed to carry on the tradition of masterfully describing the on-the-field action to the faithful, patient, and listening audience. Well, that will do it for Season 6 of From the Rafters of Rupp. If you've missed any previous episodes of the program, you can watch them now or at any time by going to our YouTube channel at From the Rafters of Rupp. Also, a big thank you goes out to all of our sponsors, as well as to everyone who's had a hand in the production of The Rafters Show. And an especially big thank you goes out to all the Kentucky fans who've watched the show. Your loyal support of the Big Blue is what makes UK fans the best fans in the world. Have a great off-season, everybody. Hope to see you again next season for more tales from the Rafters of Rupp.